I didn't grow up dreaming of driving a hearse. No child does. You don't look at a long black car crawling through traffic, followed by silence and mourning, and think, someday that'll be me. But life has a way of choosing for you when you've run out of options to choose from. I was 27 when I took the job. My mother had just died. I'd burned through my savings taking care of her, and the last job I'd held, security night shift at an industrial yard, cut my hours so thin I was practically volunteering. It was Jerry, an old neighbor who worked for Beltran and Sons Funeral Transport, who offered it to me. Said they needed someone reliable, quiet, not squeamish, not full of questions. I thought I'd do it for a few weeks, maybe a month. That was 2 years ago. And now, there's not a day I don't remember the first rule. Jerry told me on my second night, as we stood next to the vehicle with the engine still warm. The hearse was an old 2005 Lincoln with a spotless back compartment and a slightly sticky steering wheel. It smelled like bleach, vinyl, and something faintly sweet that no amount of air freshener could cover. Jerry didn't say it with drama, no grave tone, no flickering flashlight under his face. Just one sentence, almost like a joke without a punchline. Whatever you do, don't drive alone after midnight. I asked him why, and he said, because that's when the roads stop being empty. I laughed. He didn't. And that silence was the first time I felt something colder than the bodies I'd been moving. At first, I treated it like hazing. You know how old guys are in this kind of business. They speak in riddles and rules, like they're the last guardians of some forgotten priesthood. There were 4 of them, according to Jerry, 4 rules. But he only told me the first that night. You're not ready for the rest, he said. I didn't press. I was too tired, and the thought of the $600 paycheck by Friday was enough to shut me up. For the first few weeks, my routes were easy. Local pickups, quiet suburbs. I never had to drive after 11. The jobs were somber but uneventful. That changed in December during the first real snow of the year, when dispatch called in a last-minute transfer. The family wanted the body moved that night, not in the morning, and they were paying extra for it. The home's usual drivers were already out on longer routes. Jerry was busy, so they called me. Midnight sharp, departure from St. Mercy's Hospice, delivery to a prep facility 2 counties over. I hesitated, even thought about calling Jerry to ask, but I didn't. I needed the money. That's always how it starts. The body was of a woman in her 80s. Natural causes. No trauma. No family member followed the car, which wasn't unusual. The nurses handed me the paperwork and whispered their condolences like I knew the deceased. I signed, loaded the body with the help of a silent orderly, and drove off just as the hospice clock turned from 11:59 to 12. Midnight, exactly. I felt something tighten in my chest, like a rubber band stretched too far, but I ignored it. I didn't even bother to put on the radio. The snow was soft, not yet sticking, and the streets glistened with an oily sheen. Traffic lights blinked in patterns meant only for ghosts. The city emptied itself quickly after midnight. No more buses, no more honks, just the hum of my tires and the occasional scatter of snowflakes across the windshield. I was alone, and that was when I began to notice it. It started with the mirrors. I have a habit of checking my rearview mirror often, more than I should, probably. Comes from my time as a security guard, always making sure no one was behind me. That night, every time I looked back, the view seemed slightly off. Not wrong, just rearranged. Buildings further than they should be. Signs I didn't remember passing. The snow looked thicker in the mirror than it did through the windshield. I thought it was the glass, or maybe my tired eyes. But the real unease started at the 23-mile mark, where the road bends slightly to the left near a line of dead pine trees. That's where I felt the shift. Not in the car, in the air, like stepping into a different room without moving. My ears popped faintly. The engine stuttered once, recovered. The GPS froze, then blinked. I looked at the screen. The route line was gone, replaced by static. Just a flickering red arrow pointing into blankness. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I shook my head, told myself the storm was messing with the satellite. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the passenger seat. I turned so fast I almost veered. The seat was empty. Of course it was. But for a split second I had seen something. A weight, a shape, as if someone had just shifted their legs or adjusted their coat. I laughed out loud, tried to shake it off, but the sound came out dry, forced. My throat hurt. I turned up the heat and locked the doors, even though I knew that was just for show. The road stayed empty. Too empty. I should have passed a gas station by then. A sign, a billboard, anything. But the world had flattened into one endless tunnel of black trees and white flakes. At 12:38 a.m., the back of the car shifted. Not a bump, not a pothole, a shift, a roll of weight, the kind you feel when a passenger turns over in their seat. I froze. My hands gripped the wheel so hard the leather bit into my skin. I didn't dare check the rear view. I just kept driving. I whispered to myself, anything to fill the silence. She's dead. It's just a body. It's just air pressure. It's just your imagination. But the silence answered back, not with words, but with a growing certainty that I was not alone. The next town came 40 minutes later. I saw its lights first. Warm, yellow windows blurred by the storm. A diner, a gas station, a drugstore. I almost cried. I pulled into the diner's empty lot and parked. I didn't get out. I just sat there, letting the heater blast my face, watching the snow melt on the windshield. I told myself I just needed coffee. Something hot, something normal. But I never left the car. I couldn't, because when I finally looked into the rearview mirror, I saw something impossible. The coffin had moved. It was still strapped down. The belts were fastened. But it had shifted, angled slightly, enough to be undeniable. And on the window above it, where frost had gathered, there were 4 small streaks, parallel, downward, as if something inside had pressed fingers against the glass and slid them down slowly. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I just sat there, my body rigid, heart hammering. And then I remembered Jerry's words, clear as day, spoken weeks before in that same lot. Never drive without company after midnight. It wasn't about falling asleep at the wheel. It wasn't about safety. It was about being a witness. Because when you're alone after midnight on these roads, things happen, and no one will believe you unless someone else saw it too. I stayed in that parking lot until dawn. Didn't move, didn't blink. When the sun rose and the snow melted enough for the world to feel normal again, I started the car, drove the rest of the way, delivered the body. I didn't tell dispatch anything. I didn't tell Jerry. But that was the last time I broke the first rule. Because whatever happened that night, whether it was the snow or my mind or something else, I know what I saw. And the next time I was asked to drive after midnight, I made sure someone was always in the passenger seat, alive or not. It had been nearly 3 weeks since that night on the empty road, the night I parked in that diner lot and didn't move until morning. I hadn't told anyone about the streaks on the rear window or the weight shift inside the hearse, or the way the GPS flickered and died just before I crossed into whatever pocket of silence that highway had become. I didn't mention the faint impression of a hand sliding slowly down glass, the sound of something shifting gently in the cargo hold like a breathless stir. I told myself there were logical explanations, simple truths hidden beneath stress and exhaustion. But deep down, some part of me had stopped pretending. That part never looked in the rearview mirror again unless the sun was out. That part remembered the rule, and that part flinched every time the phone rang late at night, as if some old thread tied to that first trip was still being tugged by unseen hands. The first 2 weeks after, I stuck to day runs. I kept my roots within the city, stayed on gridlocked roads full of cars and people and noise. When dispatch tried to send me out past 10, I said no. I blamed insomnia, stomach issues, grief for my mother, whatever they'd accept. Jerry didn't push. He gave me a look the first time I refused, a long, unreadable stare from the threshold of the prep room, but he never asked why. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he'd seen the same streaks once too. It was a Friday when the second call came. I remember because the air was wet with fog, the kind that turns street lamps into suns and headlights into ghosts. It was just past 11:15 when the main phone at dispatch rang, and I happened to be the one nearest the desk. Roger, the overnight guy, was in the back on a smoke break, so I answered without thinking. I didn't recognize the voice on the other end. Female, quiet, with the kind of calm that made you lean in to hear every word. She said her name was Rose, and that she was calling on behalf of St. Audrey's Home for the Aged, an assisted living facility about 45 miles north in Briar Hollow. She said a resident had passed during evening meal and that the family wanted an expedited transfer. She said they'd already been in touch with Beltran and Sons and were told someone would be available. I opened the logbook, but there was no entry from St. Audrey's. No death notice, no paperwork, no prior call. I asked for a callback number. She gave me one. I wrote it down, but something felt wrong even as I did. I asked who at our office had approved the request. She said Jerry had confirmed it with someone named Mr. Beltran directly. That was impossible. Mr. Beltran had died in 2004, and the business hadn't used that name on paperwork since the LLC restructure in 2012. I blinked, hesitated, then said I'd call back to confirm. She thanked me and hung up. I stood there for a moment, the phone still warm in my hand, the number sharp and clear on the pad. I tried calling it back, but the line rang endlessly without voicemail. When Roger came back in smelling of nicotine and coffee, I handed him the note and asked if we'd gotten anything from Briar Hollow. He checked his files, shook his head. No alerts, no scheduled pickups. Probably a scam, he muttered, tossing the note toward the trash. But I didn't let it fall. Something in me told me it wasn't over. By midnight, the fog had thickened into a mist that clung to everything. Windows, skin, thoughts. I should have gone home. My shift had ended at 11, but I lingered, pretending to organize equipment in the back room, checking the tires on the reserve vehicle. When I stepped outside for air, the night hit me like a whisper through glass. There was a strange warmth in the fog, as though the world had been covered in wool, and the silence wasn't empty. It was layered, dense, watching. At 12:09 a.m., my personal phone buzzed. Unknown number, one message, no name. Assigned transfer confirmed. Unit 3. Departure window 0030. Do not alter route. That was it. No context. Just instructions. The tone wasn't demanding. It didn't need to be. It sounded like someone who already knew I would follow them. Against every part of my better judgment, I opened the bay and checked Unit 3. The same Lincoln from 3 weeks before. The same sticky steering wheel. The same faint smell of bleach and old flowers. I should have walked away. I should have told Roger, or Jerry, or hell, just left my keys on the table and vanished into the fog. But the message still pulsed on my screen, and in some silent, unspoken corner of myself, I understood that this wasn't a mistake. It was a continuation. I loaded the empty gurney, adjusted the belts, checked the fuel. There was no address, no manifest. Just the destination burned into my mind. St. Audrey's. I didn't know how I knew it was real, but it felt inevitable. At 12:26, I started the engine. The GPS flashed white, then blue, then reset itself to factory mode. I didn't touch it. I pulled out of the lot and let the road lead. The city fell away like peeling paint. Streetlights dissolved into amber blurs, and the road narrowed into 2 worn lanes, flanked by trees older than the power lines. Fog rose in waves, swallowing signs, silencing sound. My headlights cut only 10 feet ahead. Beyond that, the world vanished. I glanced once at the rearview mirror. Nothing, just black. But I kept thinking about the message. Do not alter route. As if there was a route to follow. As if this road had been waiting. I reached the highway just after 1. There were no cars, no birds, not even wind. Just the hum of the engine and the low pulse of something deeper beneath the asphalt, like a second heartbeat that wasn't mine. I don't remember how long I drove. Time fell apart in that fog. But at some point, the trees gave way to fields, and then to a clearing, and then, rising out of the mist like a memory long buried, was a building. It was St. Audrey's, or something pretending to be. The sign was wooden, faded, partially rotted. The letters had been redrawn in chalk, like a child's imitation of what once was there. The building itself was Victorian in shape, but wrong in detail. Windows were too tall, doorways too narrow. Light flickered behind curtains that didn't move. I parked the hearse at the edge of the circle drive and cut the engine. Silence. Nothing moved. I stepped out slowly, unsure of whether the ground would hold me. The air smelled faintly of camphor and old linens. The front door opened before I reached it. No sound. Just a slow, wide swing as if pushed by breath. Inside, a narrow hallway stretched in both directions, wallpaper peeled and water damaged. At the center of the room stood a woman in gray scrubs. Her face was pale, smooth, featureless, in the way wax sometimes forgets the human shape. She smiled, or something close to it, and said only, "He's ready." I wanted to ask who, wanted to demand to see paperwork, signatures, death certificates, anything, but my mouth wouldn't open. My limbs moved without thought. I followed her down the corridor, past doors numbered out of sequence, 13, 4, 9, 12, 1, 1 again. At the end of the hall was a body bag already zipped, resting on a cot. No tags, No clipboard, just a quiet, waiting wait. I loaded it without speaking. The woman watched. As I turned to leave, she touched my arm. Her skin was cold. "Remember," she said softly. "The second rule." I paused. My throat tightened. "What?" I asked. But she was already walking away, back into the impossible corridor, and I stood alone in the foyer of a building that had no business standing. I returned to the hearse. The bag lay still in the back, no motion, no noise. But as I started the engine, the GPS lit up again, flickered, then displayed a new destination. Home. No address, no coordinates, just the word. And as I pulled back onto the road, headlights cutting through the fog like knives through silk, I remembered what Jerry had said would come next. Rule 2, never stop if you see someone waving. And I knew whatever was coming, I wasn't ready. There are certain things that happen on the road that you never talk about again, not because you're sworn to secrecy, but because silence is the only way to keep them from following you home. That night after I left St. Audrey's, I didn't speak to anyone for almost 2 days. I didn't call dispatch. I didn't return the keys. I left the hearse parked outside my apartment like a rusted relic, engine ticking in the cold, the back compartment locked, silent, untouched. I didn't want to open it. I couldn't. I told myself I was just tired, that I'd imagined the woman in gray, the rearranged corridors, the destination marked only as home. But I couldn't ignore the smell that still clung to the air vents, faint, earthy, and wrong. It wasn't rot. It wasn't formaldehyde. It was older than that, like moss soaked in river water and buried in stone. It followed me into the stairwell, into my dreams, into the pauses between each breath. I didn't sleep the first night. I sat on the edge of my mattress, fully dressed, watching the red digits on my alarm clock tick past midnight, and I waited for a knock, a whisper, a sign that what I'd brought back wasn't gone. But nothing came. No sounds, no phone calls, just silence. That, in a way, was worse, because now I was sure I hadn't just dreamed it. Dreams don't follow you into the daylight. It wasn't until the following afternoon that Jerry came by. I hadn't told him I'd taken the call. I hadn't told anyone. But he showed up anyway, stood on my doorstep in the same brown jacket he always wore, eyes heavier than usual, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. He looked past me into the dark of my apartment and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He handed me the paper and walked away without another word. It was a handwritten list. 4 items, each one numbered. I already knew the first. 1. Never drive without company after midnight. I read the second slowly, the penmanship rough, almost trembling. 2. Never stop if you see someone waving. Beneath it, in smaller print, were 4 words scratched into the margin. No matter who it is. I stared at those words for a long time. The ink was smudged slightly, as if someone's thumb had pressed over it again and again, like a compulsion. I folded the paper and put it in my jacket. That night I returned the hearse to the garage. No one said a word. No one asked about the transfer. The logbooks hadn't recorded the call. The number from the text had been wiped from my phone. But when I looked under the belts in the back compartment, I found a smear of damp soil along the edge, and a single imprint of a bare heel, small and delicate, as if someone had stepped out of the bag and stood there watching the road pass for miles. It was nearly a week before I was sent out again on a late route. I almost said no. My hands shook when I saw the time. 11:15 p.m., scheduled delivery to a rural plot east of Dalton, a cemetery so small it didn't even have a proper name, just a stone arch that said family ground, and an iron gate rusted open long before I was born. I took Unit 2 this time, not the Lincoln, a newer model, white instead of black. I told myself it would be different. I told myself the first 2 rules were enough to keep me safe. But when I reached the edge of County Road 97, the asphalt thinning into gravel and the trees leaning so close they blocked the moon, I remembered something else Jerry once told me. Something I'd laughed off as the kind of thing old men say to scare new hires. "There are things that die but don't want to stop moving," he said, "and the roads give them a chance to hitch a ride." It was just after midnight when I saw the man on the shoulder. He was standing in the fog about 20 yards ahead, one arm raised, palm open, fingers stretched like he was hailing a cab. At first I thought he was hurt. He didn't move, didn't wave frantically or call out, just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue carved from dust and regret. I slowed instinctively. My foot hovered over the brake. Then I remembered the rule. Never stop, no matter who it is. I accelerated, not enough to hit him, just enough to pass. I kept my eyes forward. I told myself not to look, but I did. I couldn't help it. His face was familiar. It was my brother, or it looked like him. Same jawline, same uneven ears, same scar under the chin from when we were kids and he fell off his bike. But my brother had died in Afghanistan in 2007. I saw the body. I carried the casket. I poured the dirt into the hole. And yet, he was there, watching me, hand raised, eyes hollow. I drove faster. The road twisted left, then right, and the man vanished into the mist. I didn't breathe again until I reached the gate of the cemetery. I parked, sat in silence, heart pounding, hands numb. I told myself it was a trick, a memory layered over fog, a projection from the guilt I'd never learned to carry properly. I buried my face in my hands and sat there until the first bird called out from the trees. Only then did I step out, wheel the body to the plot, complete the drop, and drive home before the sun was fully awake. But the road had changed, not in direction, in memory, because every turn now felt dangerous. Every figure in the distance could be someone I knew, someone I loved, and the longer I drove, the more I realized the second rule wasn't about danger in the traditional sense. It was about seduction. The road shows you what you want, what you've lost, what you would give anything to see again. A lover, a parent, a child, a version of yourself. And if you stop, if you open that door and let them in, they don't leave. They never leave. I know this because I broke the rule. Not that night, but once. 2 years before I took the job at Beltran & Sons, I was driving home from my mother's place after a long weekend. I'd been drinking, but not enough to blur the road. It was late. I was tired. Somewhere near the state line, I saw a woman in a white dress waving from the shoulder. I stopped. She got in. I don't remember her face, only her eyes. Blue, glassy, never blinking. She didn't speak, just pointed forward. I drove 20 miles in silence before I noticed the smell, wet dirt and lilies. I turned to ask her where she was going. The seat was empty. When I got home that night, I had bruises on my arm in the shape of fingers. I thought it was a dream, until I saw her again, years later, on another road, wearing the same dress, waving. And now, every time I drive past midnight, I wonder who I'll see next. My father, my mother, myself. And I wonder what I'll do when the hand that rises is too familiar to ignore. Because the second rule is simple, but not easy. And the road is patient. It knows you'll stop eventually. There's a difference between being alone and being watched. I used to think loneliness was the worst thing the road could offer, that the silence was what unstrung your nerves, that the shadows behind each tree, each barn, each mile marker were just empty vessels your brain poured fears into to stay awake. But I know now that silence is merciful. Silence is absence. What truly unsettles the soul is presence, uninvited, unconfirmed, unexplained. And when you drive a hearse through roads where even the wind refuses to follow, that presence doesn't always ride in the back. Sometimes it sits closer. It had been a week since I saw the man on the shoulder, the thing that wore my brother's face. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't mentioned it to Jerry, hadn't recorded it in the log, hadn't even written it down. I told myself that if I ignored it long enough, it would fade. But it didn't. If anything, it grew. The memory rooted itself into my routines. I began avoiding mirrors altogether. I changed my driving routes during the day just to avoid that stretch near Dalton. I moved the second rule from my jacket pocket to the back of my wallet, hoping that burying it closer to my skin would keep it more real, more mine. And still, something clung to me. The problem wasn't the figures on the road anymore. It was the space inside the car. I started to notice it in the small things. The driver's seat would feel off every time I sat down, like someone taller had adjusted it just slightly. The climate control would reset itself, always colder than I remembered. The radio, which I never touched, sometimes buzzed quietly even when turned off, as if tuned to a frequency not meant for human ears. Once I turned the key in the ignition, and the windshield wipers began swiping without a drop of rain in the sky. But the most disturbing thing, the thing that broke whatever resolve I had left, was the seatbelt. It began on a run to Fairhaven Crematory. A midday pickup. Nothing strange, at least on paper. The body was elderly, already embalmed. The family had requested privacy and declined to follow the hearse. I didn't think twice. I loaded the casket, triple-checked the belts in the back, and began the hour-long drive along Highway 28. About 20 minutes in, I glanced to my right. Without thinking, the passenger seat belt was buckled. I froze. I never buckle it. No one rides with me. And yet, there it was, snug, clipped, resting flat against the seat, as if someone was sitting there, neatly belted in, waiting to arrive. I told myself it was a fluke, that I must have knocked it while adjusting my coat or resting my clipboard. I reached over, unbuckled it, and tried to laugh it off. But the moment the clip released, a sound emerged from the back seat, a soft, shifting creak, like something leaning forward. I pulled over immediately, parked the car, killed the engine. I sat in the driver's seat, hands clenched around the wheel, heart pounding so hard it shook my ribs. I didn't turn around. I didn't check the back. I didn't even breathe too loud. I just waited, frozen, silent, until the heat of the day faded and the dusk rolled in. When I finally looked again, the seatbelt was unbuckled. Nothing in the mirror, no noise. But the silence had changed again. It no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited. From that point on, the seatbelt began to reappear regularly, always after midnight, always without a sound. Sometimes it would click into place while I was driving, no sudden movement, no weight shifting, no one visible. But the sound would be there, that mechanical click, unmistakable and confident. I tried ignoring it at first, then I began speaking to it, softly, under my breath. "You're not welcome," I said once. "I don't know who you are. I don't care." Another time I simply whispered, "Please leave," but it never answered, and the belt never stayed unbuckled for long. The worst incident happened on a return run from Oak Ridge Parish. The drop had gone smoothly, the family weeping softly by the graveside as I waited in the vehicle, engine idling. It was past 1 a.m. by the time I left the cemetery, and the roads back were all winding country loops, narrow and poorly lit. About 15 miles in, my headlights began to flicker. Not go out, just dim, then brighten, like eyes blinking in slow confusion. I tapped the switch, checked the alternator light. No indicators. I chalked it up to aging bulbs. Then came the fog. Not a soft mist like before. This was dense, choking, rolling like smoke across the road in heavy sheets. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I slowed, leaned forward, strained to see the road. And then I heard it. Breathing, not mine. It was shallow, just behind me, near my shoulder. Close, steady, rhythmic. I didn't turn. I didn't move. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles cracked. I whispered the first word that came to me. "Stop." The breathing continued. I said it again, louder this time. "Stop." And then, for the first time since all this began, I heard a voice. Soft, feminine, calm. Why? I don't remember how I got home. I don't remember the rest of the drive. All I know is that I woke up the next morning on my couch, my uniform still on, the hearse parked outside, perfectly clean. I checked the passenger seat. The belt was buckled. I unfastened it and stepped back. This time I opened the glove box and found something that hadn't been there before. A Polaroid. Old, faded, yellowed around the corners. It showed a hearse, not ours, parked on a similar road, surrounded by trees. In the driver's seat was a man I didn't recognize, but in the passenger seat was a woman in a white dress, hair covering her face. Neither looked at the camera. There was no date on the photo, no caption, just a faint thumbprint smudged in the bottom right corner. I burned it that night, but I still see it in my dreams. I told Jerry everything the next morning. I expected him to laugh, to scold me, to say I was losing it, but instead he just nodded, sat down, lit a cigarette he never lit indoors, and said, "They find you when the seats are empty too long." He didn't elaborate, just stared at the smoke as it curled toward the ceiling, like it was spelling words he didn't want to read out loud. He gave me something then, a small brass token, no bigger than a quarter. It was worn smooth on one side and etched crudely on the other were the words, "Passenger claimed." He told me to leave it on the seat, keep it in the open, let them think the space was taken. "Sometimes that's all it takes," he said. "A placeholder." That was 6 days ago. Since then, the seatbelt hasn't buckled once. But sometimes, When I check the mirror, I still see a shape in the glass, a silhouette blurred and pale, watching me from just behind the headrest. I tell myself it's a reflection. I tell myself the seat is empty, but deep down, I know. I've never driven alone since that night, and I'm starting to wonder if I ever did. There is a moment that exists between hearing your name and responding to it, a space so brief it can vanish between heartbeats, and yet it holds a gravity far deeper than most people will ever realize. It's a moment of invitation, of permission, of recognition. A name isn't just a word, it's a tether, and when you acknowledge it, you pull something toward you. That's what the third rule is about. That split second, that instinct to turn when something speaks your name in the dark, that mistake. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it meant prank calls or whispers from open windows, maybe even dreams. But now I know. Now I've felt it, heard it, and I'll never hear my name the same way again. It began a few nights after I started keeping the token Jerry gave me in the passenger seat. At first, things seemed to settle. The belt stopped buckling itself. The car interior remained undisturbed. The temperature gauge held steady. I thought maybe the ritual worked, that it had tricked whatever presence had followed me into believing the hearse was already occupied. I even managed a few midnight runs without incident. I kept the rules close, mentally reciting them like scripture each time I turned the key. 1. Never drive alone after midnight. 2. Never stop if you see someone waving. And now 3. Never answer if someone calls your name. The last one felt abstract at first, less rooted in physical danger, and more like an old superstition, a warning passed down like a charm. But there was something in the wording that stuck with me. Not, never respond to voices. Not, ignore sounds in the dark. It was specific. Never answer if someone calls your name. Not anything else. Your name. The one thing that binds you tighter than blood or flesh. It was a Tuesday when the rule proved itself. I had a simple run that night. A late drop-off for a closed casket service scheduled the following morning. The family had requested no procession. They didn't want to follow. No friends, no flowers, no farewells. Just a body and a signature. I picked up the hearse around 10:30, loaded the casket with minimal help, and left the garage by 11. The destination was a private mortuary in an area I didn't recognize, Whistler Glen, a part of the county that doesn't appear on most GPS systems, and where the roads are often just lines of tar painted over gravel and prayer. I had a printed map clipped to the dash, courtesy of Jerry, and a sticky note that read in his handwriting, "Keep the windows shut. Stay on the pavement. No detours." He didn't say why. He never does. I didn't ask. The road to Whistler Glen was a winding tunnel of sycamores and black pines. The fog began early that night, low and heavy, clinging to the road like a second skin. My headlights caught glimmers of frost in the tree limbs, and the air was so still it felt like I was driving through a photograph. No birds, no wind, just the hum of tires over brittle asphalt. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to glance into the mirror. Not even once. The route was narrow, and the turns were sharp. I had to focus. I told myself that's why I kept feeling the tightness in my chest. Not fear, just focus. It was just past midnight when I heard it. My name. Not a whisper, not a hallucination. Spoken, clearly, from the back seat. Ethan. A single word, perfectly formed, just loud enough to rise above the sound of the engine, but soft enough to make me question whether I'd imagined it. I didn't move. My hands locked around the wheel, knuckles whitening. I kept my eyes glued to the road. The headlights washed over another curve. The trees thinned slightly. The road dipped. "Ethan," it said again, louder this time, almost curious. I didn't answer. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. My mouth went dry. My foot hovered on the accelerator. Every fiber of me screamed to look, to see, to check. But I knew the rule. I had to trust it. For nearly 2 minutes, the voice said nothing. Silence returned. The car coasted forward, tires crunching faintly over small patches of gravel, the fog deepening like cotton pressed against glass. I thought maybe it was over, that whatever it was had given up. But then came the third time. Ethan. Different now, not curious. Closer. Right behind my headrest. I felt the breath, warm and humid and wrong, curl along the side of my neck. My body went rigid. I kept my gaze dead ahead, and then I did something I shouldn't have. I flinched. It was barely a movement. A twitch of my jaw, a tension in my shoulders. But it was enough. The voice laughed. Quiet, small, a child's giggle inside a coffin. I tasted bile. The radio turned on by itself. Static, high-pitched and shrill, like 1,000 wasps buzzing from every speaker. I reached for the dial, but it wouldn't turn. The screen glowed with impossible symbols. Circular, fractured, moving like insects trapped under glass. The static grew louder, louder. My vision blurred. The road began to shimmer. And then it stopped. Everything. Silence, stillness, and the realization that I had missed a turn. The road ahead was gone. No pavement, no gravel, just dirt and fog and woods. I slammed the brakes, the tires locked. The hearse skidded sideways and stopped just short of a ditch. I sat there, heart in my throat, eyes burning, throat dry. The GPS was blank. The radio was off. The air was dead. I didn't remember making any turn. I didn't remember slowing down. But there I was, far from any marked road, surrounded by trees I'd never seen, with the casket in the back and a voice that knew my name. I turned the hearse around manually, slow, methodical. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe too loud. I didn't turn on the radio again. I followed the trail of crushed leaves and disturbed gravel until I found the main road. And when I did, I kept driving. Fast. Focused. I didn't stop until I reached the gates of Whistler Glen. The mortuary was silent. Dark. But a man stood waiting on the porch, a clipboard in hand. He didn't ask me anything. Just nodded, signed the form, took the delivery. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever heard voices, if he knew about the rules. But I didn't. His eyes were sunken and unreadable. He handed me a small envelope without a word. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Typed. Neat. Rule 3. Never answer if someone calls your name, even if it's your own voice. And beneath that, handwritten in ink, especially if it's your own voice. I didn't drive home that night. I parked in an empty lot by the edge of town and waited for the sun to rise. When it finally did, I stepped out into the morning light and realized something chilling. My phone had been recording. The voice memo app was open, running. The timestamp, 12:03 a.m. The file length, exactly 4 minutes and 44 seconds. The title, Ethan.mp3. I listened once, just once. It was my voice, calm, clear, speaking in a tone I've never used, repeating one sentence over and over. It's safe now. Look, I deleted it. But some nights when I drive alone and the road is too quiet and the fog curls in just the right way, I swear I hear it again, echoing faintly from the vents, calling me by name. It began with a route I didn't recognize. Not a detour, not a new highway expansion, not even one of those unlisted back roads that locals sometimes use to bypass traffic. It was a stretch of road I had never seen, never heard mentioned, never read on a dispatch slip or seen etched in faded ink on Jerry's hand-drawn maps. And yet it existed, black as coal and perfectly paved, snaking away from the familiar into a corridor of silence so dense that even the engine noise sounded like a whisper. That night, the call had come through at 9:43 p.m., an early one, the kind I preferred, a pickup from a rural care facility I'd been to twice before. The staff was courteous, always quiet and efficient, and the paperwork was in order before I even parked. The man was elderly, his passing uneventful, his family distant. It was the sort of transfer that left no residue, no emotional weight to carry, just a logistical task. Body from point A to point B. I loaded him alone, careful as always, and set off by 10:15. The air was unusually still for late autumn, the moon dull behind a gauze of clouds, and the fog wasn't heavy but oddly low, clinging to the road in shallow ripples like breath that had settled and refused to lift. The route should have been simple. Take County Road 12, merge onto 134, then cut east along the old highway into Cedar Hollow, where the funeral home waited with their lights on and coffee always stale. I'd driven it before, muscle memory forming where directions used to live, and yet 20 minutes in, I passed a sign I didn't remember. A rusted metal plate skewed at an angle, half consumed by vines and time. Its letters barely legible, but still there. Arroyo Creek, 2 miles. I had no recollection of Arroyo Creek. It wasn't on the paperwork. It wasn't on the wall map at the garage. And more importantly, it wasn't on the GPS, which had frozen 5 minutes earlier, its blue dot stuck in place while the car moved forward. I pulled over briefly, half expecting the device to correct itself or at least reset, but it didn't. The screen remained static, the little arrow glowing dumbly, like it was waiting for permission to continue. I restarted it, but it only blinked once and turned black. At that point, I should have turned around. I knew that. I wasn't new. I had seen what came of ignoring rules, even the ones that weren't written. But something about the turn ahead drew me in. Not curiosity, not a sense of adventure, but something deeper and colder, like being pulled underwater by a current you didn't notice until your feet left the bottom. The turn was sharp, the asphalt darker than the road I'd come from, smooth and wet even though it hadn't rained. There were no potholes, no cracks, no roadkill or gravel, just a seamless black ribbon vanishing into trees that leaned too far inward, their branches thin and high, bending in unnatural arcs as if shaped by some slow, methodical hand. As I drove deeper, I began to notice the absence. No signs, no fences, no telephone poles or distant house lights, no sounds from the woods except the faint crunch of tires rolling over asphalt that felt too soft beneath me. The hearse's interior, usually so still and predictable, began to feel tighter, more humid, as though the windows had been sealed shut and the oxygen inside had stopped cycling. I rolled one window down to check, but the handle jammed halfway, the glass lowering just enough to let in a sliver of scent. Wet wood, iron, and something sweet, cloying, like spoiled fruit rotting beneath floorboards. I closed it quickly and turned the heat off entirely, but the pressure in the cabin didn't change. That was when I saw the markers. Not signs, not mileposts, but small structures along the shoulder. Stone piles, arranged neatly, no more than 2 feet high, spaced evenly every 100 feet. Each one had a single item placed atop it: a boot, a cracked mug, a folded cloth, a book missing its spine. Personal things, not trash, offerings, or warnings. I couldn't tell. I kept driving, gripping the wheel harder, the cabin silent except for the low mechanical hum of wheels on something that no longer felt like road. I didn't look in the mirror. I hadn't for miles, but I could feel the shape in the back growing heavier, as if the weight of the casket had doubled. I reminded myself it was just a body, just mass and matter, no different than hauling a freezer or a couch, but that rational thought felt flimsy in my mouth, a thing rehearsed too often to be believed. The road narrowed then, not visibly but perceptibly, like the car had to adjust itself, like the shoulders had been pressed in by invisible fingers. The trees grew taller, straighter, their bark darker than I thought trees could be, and their leaves didn't move, not even when the car passed close enough for the wind to touch them. That's when I noticed the lines on the road had vanished. No center divider, no shoulder stripes, just pure black beneath me, stretching forever in both directions. And that was when I finally tried the radio, even knowing it wouldn't work. Static, not white noise, but deep, almost subsonic, bass tones that made my jaw ache. I turned it off again and drove in silence, knowing that I had somehow crossed into something else, something unrecorded. I don't know how long I was on that road. Time slipped. My watch kept ticking, but the hands didn't move. My phone was dead. The sky never lightened or darkened. It stayed the same sick gray, and the headlights didn't reach far enough to see anything beyond the next bend. Then, all at once, the road ended. Not tapered, not merged. Ended. A sheer cliff of dirt and trees stood ahead where pavement should have continued. I hit the brakes gently, came to a stop and stared at the wall of roots and rock before me. There was nowhere to go. I didn't feel panic. Not yet. Just confusion. I reached for the map, unfolded it with trembling hands, and traced the route back. Arroyo Creek didn't exist. The road I'd taken wasn't there. The stretch I was parked on didn't connect to anything. According to the map, I was surrounded by forest, no road at all. I stepped out of the car. The air outside was wrong, thicker than it should have been and hot, like the breath of something immense and sleeping. I walked around to the back, opened the cargo door and checked the casket. The belts were still tight, but the lid was damp. Not soaked, just beaded with condensation, as though whatever was inside had started to heat from within. I didn't touch it. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there until I noticed something else. On the dirt directly behind the hearse were footprints. Bare, human, one pair. They weren't mine. I got back into the car, locked the doors, and turned the engine. It started, but the gas gauge now read empty, even though I had filled it just before departure. I didn't care. I turned the vehicle around, headlights sweeping over those stone piles again, Closer now, with items I hadn't seen before, a child's shoe, a pair of broken glasses, a dog tag. I drove faster than I should have, retracing what little I remembered of the path I took in, and then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the old county road reappeared, rough and cracked and real. The GPS came back online, the radio reset, my watch ticked. I reached Cedar Hollow an hour late, and no one asked why. The funeral home accepted the body, signed the form, and offered me the same bitter coffee they always did. But as I left, one of the attendants, a man I'd never seen before, pressed something into my hand. A photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed the same stretch of forest, the same stone piles, and in the corner, almost invisible, a hearse driving into the trees. On the back in pencil was a single phrase, "Don't drive roads that don't remember you." I haven't, not since. But sometimes when I drive alone late at night, the GPS signal flickers and a road appears where none should be. Pitch black, perfectly paved, waiting. And I wonder what would happen if I followed it again, if it would still let me come back, or if this time it would remember me too well. You learn to trust paper in this line of work. It's never the living who are reliable. Families break down, argue, misremember, scream, disappear, but the paperwork stays steady, printed in black ink, boxed in form fields, signed, witnessed, time-stamped. You learn to treat the manifest as gospel. You drive where it tells you to drive. You deliver to the address it provides. No matter what anyone says, no matter who calls, no matter what kind of message flickers across the GPS, you follow the manifest. Because if you deviate, even once, you begin to see the cracks in the surface of the road, the thin places between where we are and where we aren't supposed to go, and the things that live in that thinness don't like attention. That's what the fourth rule is meant to prevent. Not mistakes, not inefficiency, but entanglement. The kind of entanglement that takes hold quietly, like roots wrapping around your feet beneath the soil, tightening with every mile you drift from the path you were supposed to take. I broke the fourth rule only once. That was all it took. It started with a double transfer, the kind that usually involves early morning pickup from a regional morgue and direct delivery to a twin plot burial outside the city. The manifest was clear, printed that same morning with all the signatures in place. 2 names, 2 addresses, 1 cremation, 1 interment. I loaded both caskets with help from a new assistant named Michael who had just joined the company. He was tall, quiet, and didn't ask questions, a quality I'd come to value more than experience. The first leg of the trip went without issue. We delivered the cremation unit to a small facility nestled between a shuttered laundromat and a Vietnamese bakery. The staff greeted us like old friends, and the handoff was done in less than 10 minutes. The second delivery, however, was to a property I didn't recognize. The name on the manifest was Graveside Endowment Lot 7C, which sounded official, but the address looked wrong. Too short, no zip code. The street name was Old March Lane, but when I searched it, nothing came up. Not in the GPS, not on my phone, not even on the county website. Still, the document was stamped. Official. It even had the family's signature at the bottom. So I drove. The city thinned into gray suburbs, then into yellowing farmland, and finally into a skeletal stretch of dead oaks and split-rail fences. The clouds were low that day, not heavy, just suffocating, pressing down against the fields like they wanted to swallow the landscape whole. Michael sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window as if waiting for something to reappear. He didn't comment when I took the turn onto a gravel path that had no signage. He didn't flinch when the GPS blinked off. He only spoke once, after 20 minutes of slow descent into a hollow framed by rusted barbed wire and stone walls crumbling with ivy. "Do you hear that?" he asked, voice quiet, like he wasn't sure he wanted me to answer. I didn't, not at first, but as I let off the gas and rolled to a stop near a clearing that might once have been a cemetery, I heard it. A bell, small, hollow, ringing in an irregular rhythm, like wind chimes made of bone. There was no wind. The clearing was empty. No caretakers, no signposts, just patches of disturbed soil and rows of markers so eroded they looked like teeth half buried in a dying mouth. I checked the manifest again. The name matched. The address, what there was of it, matched. There was no building, no reception, only a single wooden sign, hand-painted in flaking black, Lot 7C. I parked, opened the back, and helped Michael unload the casket. It was heavier than usual, but not in weight, in resistance. like something inside it didn't want to be moved, or like the air around it had grown viscous, dragging against our sleeves and skin. We wheeled it to the center of the lot and looked around. Still no one. The bell continued to chime. I pulled out my phone to call dispatch, but the screen stayed black. Michael said nothing. His face had gone pale, sweat dotting his brow despite the cold. I asked him if he was all right. He didn't answer, just pointed toward the far edge of the clearing. There, emerging from the tree line, was a figure, old, bent, dressed in funeral black that hung like drapes around a frame too thin to be whole. The figure didn't speak. It walked slowly to the casket, reached out one hand, thin and wrinkled like dried parchment, and pressed it gently against the lid. Then it nodded, just once, and turned back into the woods. Michael turned to me, lips parting to speak, but then froze. His eyes widened. "There's no handle," he whispered. I looked down. He was right. The casket had no handles, no seams, no hinges, no nameplate. It had never had them. We left it there. There was nothing else to do. On the drive back, we didn't speak. The sky remained gray. The GPS didn't turn on until we passed back through the last row of dead oaks. When it finally did, it rerouted us automatically back to the garage, bypassing every known road, as if guiding us out of something it couldn't name. When we arrived, Jerry was waiting. He looked at me, then at Michael, then at the empty rear compartment. "Which one?" he asked. I handed him the manifest. He didn't read it, just tore it in half, threw it in the oil drum outside, and lit a match. He didn't scold, didn't ask why I followed an address that didn't exist. He only said, "They'll send you one now." I didn't understand then, not until later. 2 nights later, I received a manila envelope at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single page, aged, stamped with a funeral home's seal that had been retired a decade ago. At the top, typed in bold, "Delivery confirmation, manifest override." Underneath, my name, the date of the delivery. The signature field was empty. At the bottom, written in the same pale ink as the seal, were 5 words: "We deliver what answers back." I tried calling Jerry, no response. I tried reaching Michael. He'd quit that morning. Left no forwarding number, just a note in his locker that said, "Don't answer the door. I don't do deliveries anymore. Not late ones. Not ones that come with odd addresses or half-completed forms. I cross out anything that doesn't match exactly and return it to dispatch." But sometimes a route still tries to trick me. A slip of paper will appear on the dash. A waypoint will light up on the GPS, blinking softly like a heartbeat. And sometimes I still hear that bell, ringing faintly through the vents, even when the car is parked. I turn the volume up. I keep my eyes forward. I remind myself that the map is holy, that the rules are not suggestions. And I think about that casket with no seams, no plate, no name, just a weight in the shape of memory, waiting to be carried somewhere it never left. Some deliveries stay with you, even when your hands are empty and the vehicle has long since been cleaned. You try to wash the scent out of the air vents, scrub the flooring until your knees ache, restock the gloves and clipboards and bleach wipes as if mechanical order can disinfect memory. But memory doesn't obey solvents. It doesn't fade like blood. It absorbs into the seams of the steering wheel, the creak of the rear door, the rubber of the tires that rolled too far beyond the edge of the map. After that final drop, the one Jerry never spoke of, the one no one would admit to, I should have quit. I told myself I would. I even typed the message to dispatch and hovered my finger over the send button. But I didn't send it, because by then I already knew there wasn't a clear exit. There never had been. Once you deviate, once you take a turn that the map doesn't bless, the road never really lets you back. 3 nights later, I received another call. No caller ID, no ringtone, just the screen lighting up at exactly 1:11 a.m., displaying the word dispatch in a font that wasn't the phone's default. I didn't answer. I powered the phone off. In the morning, it was on again, fully charged, even though I hadn't plugged it in. The call log was empty. But in my glove compartment, folded between 2 faded manifests, was a new one. Fresh ink, new paper, my name typed at the top. 1 delivery, no pickup, no listed origin, just a destination. Return to site, end of route 0.7. I knew that code. It wasn't an address. It wasn't even a location. It was an artifact, an old placeholder used during system maintenance, a catch-all when the software glitched or a driver's location couldn't be tracked. It wasn't supposed to print. It wasn't supposed to exist outside of a screen, but there it was, in my hand, in a sealed envelope, waiting. I stared at it for an hour. I called Jerry's number again. Disconnected. I drove to the garage. The gate was open. The lights were off. The bays were all closed except for one. Unit 3, my hearse. The same one from the first call. The one from St. Audrey's. The one that never quite lost the faint perfume of decay mixed with something floral and bitter. The keys were in the ignition. The manifest lay on the driver's seat. This time there was no route to follow. The GPS powered on but displayed only a single arrow pointing forward. No roads, no cities, just empty grid. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I started driving. The city peeled back like old wallpaper, block by block, until the buildings thinned and the trees returned. I didn't see another car, no headlights, no taillights. Just an open road and the soft pulse of the GPS arrow leading me deeper into a silence that felt too deliberate to be accidental. I passed familiar exits only to see them vanish in the rear view like dreams you forget mid-sentence. The mile markers disappeared. The street signs turned blank. Eventually, even the sky changed. Not darker, not lighter, just less, as if the horizon had given up pretending to exist. And through it all, the hearse hummed steadily beneath me, as if nothing were wrong, as if this were just another route, just another client waiting to be delivered home. I don't know how long I drove. My watch froze at 2:17. The dashboard clock blinked 88:88. My phone was dead again. I remember the moment the pavement changed, the texture under the tires shifting from asphalt to something softer, smoother, like glass that had never cooled. The trees on either side began to bend backward, their branches reaching away from the road as if repelled. I kept going, not because I wanted to, but because turning around didn't feel like an option anymore. I no longer believed there was anything behind me, only forward. Eventually I arrived. It wasn't a facility. It wasn't a cemetery. It wasn't a church or a crematory or a morgue or even a clearing. It was a structure, low, wide, windowless, made of a black material that didn't reflect light, didn't absorb it, didn't belong to any category I knew. It looked like a bruise carved into the shape of a building. There was no door, but the GPS beeped once and went dark. The hearse stopped on its own. The engine cut. The interior lights died. I opened the back without thinking and found the casket waiting. Not the one I had delivered days ago. Not any I recognized. It was new, smooth, featureless, identical to the one we left behind in Lot 7C. No handles, no plaque, no evidence of assembly, just a shape that suggested weight. I didn't question how it got there. I wheeled it out, the gurney gliding too easily over the ground, as if the surface itself had been designed to welcome it. When I reached the structure, the wall facing me shifted, not opening, not moving, just changing, becoming less wall and more absence. I wheeled the casket into the space, and the light inside bent strangely, curling away from the corners like it didn't want to commit. I didn't follow. I left it there. The opening reformed behind me, silent, seamless. I returned to the hearse, sat behind the wheel, and waited for something to tell me I was finished. Nothing did. The vehicle restarted. The GPS reawakened. This time it simply said exit route. No arrow, no direction. I turned the car around, drove back the way I had come, retracing a road that now looked less like a road and more like a scar. I reached the highway by what must have been dawn, though the sun never fully rose. The garage was open when I returned. Jerry wasn't there. Neither was Michael. A new man sat behind the desk. I'd never seen him before. He handed me a clipboard without a word. On it, a final form. No date, no time, just my name, and the phrase, terminal transfer completed. Route closed. I signed it. I left without speaking. Since that day, I haven't received another manifest. I still check every morning, every night, compulsively, but the slot remains empty. The phone never rings. The routes never refresh. I keep the hearse parked outside just in case. I keep the key in my coat. And some nights, when the fog returns and the streets go quiet, I think about what it meant to deliver something that didn't come from anywhere, to a place that wasn't supposed to exist. I think about the rules. I think about the silence that followed. And I wonder if there's a fifth rule no one ever wrote down, because those who learned it never made it back to tell the rest of us what it was. There are certain truths you carry like splinters, So small, so buried beneath the surface, you almost forget they're there until one day something presses too hard and the pain blooms fresh, and suddenly, the whole structure of your memory warps around that tiny foreign body. I thought that returning from the place at the end of the road would be enough, that bringing the hearse back and handing in that final form would sever whatever invisible tether had wound itself around me. But the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was echo. A vast, deliberate pause, like something waiting to see what I would do next. Days passed, then weeks. The calls stopped. The office felt different, emptier, like its function had been fulfilled, and now it only performed itself by rote. The new man at the desk didn't ask questions, didn't seem to know what came before him. He processed forms that didn't arrive and answered phones that didn't ring. Jerry never returned. Michael remained uncontactable. I stopped checking the manifests. I told myself I was done, that I had done my part, that there was nothing left to unravel. But that's the danger with silence. It tempts you to fill it, and the moment I tried to forget, the proof arrived. It came without warning, folded into the morning mail like a standard utility bill, nestled between envelopes offering loans and second-hand insurance. No sender, just my name. The paper inside was heavy, rough to the touch, slightly warped like it had been exposed to heat or moisture or time. On one side, printed in a font that wasn't quite right, each letter too thin, each serif too sharp, was a table of data. Coordinates, dates, materials, estimated mass. It looked like something from a geological survey, but the name at the top wasn't mine. It was the name of the man I'd delivered weeks ago, the one whose casket had no handles, the one I'd left in that featureless building beyond the maps. The data detailed composition samples, bone density, decay rate, carbon values, but none of it made sense. According to the analysis, the body was over 140 years old, yet the death certificate I'd filed listed the man as 78, with a birth year that placed him squarely in the middle of the previous century. The document cited a compound found in the body that hadn't existed until after the Second World War. The carbon readings suggested a diet not native to our hemisphere, and at the bottom of the page, a final line in smaller text: temporal consistency, non-verifiable, memory erosion likely. I stared at the words until they lost meaning. I turned the paper over. The back was blank, except for one handwritten note, ink still faintly wet. It said, "Check the camera." I didn't have to wonder what it meant. I knew. During that final drive, when the GPS had collapsed into symbols and the trees had turned their backs on the road, I had activated the dash camera out of instinct, not because I expected it to record anything meaningful, but because something in me wanted to be able to review the gaps afterward, to prove that I had gone somewhere even if I couldn't describe it. But when I'd returned and checked the footage that night, the files had all shown static. Not corrupted, not deleted, just 5 continuous hours of white noise and color bars. I'd written it off as magnetic interference, but now, with the document in my hand, I retrieved the storage drive, plugged it in, and played the last recording again. This time it worked. It began with a close-up of the dashboard, the speedometer flickering slightly, the radio display frozen at 0. Then the camera tilted as if moved by an unseen hand, and began recording the passenger seat. Empty. Clean. Until it wasn't. The figure appeared without transition. One frame it wasn't there, and the next it was. A blur at first, then sharper, clearer, as the video adjusted. A man in a dark suit, skin gray and tight, eyes closed, hands folded neatly over his lap. His chest didn't rise, his mouth didn't move, but his head turned toward the camera, slowly, mechanically, as if acknowledging the lens. Then, in perfect sync with the timestamp rolling forward, his lips parted and he spoke. But there was no sound, no voice, just a single frame of text that blinked into the corner of the screen. Do you see it now? The video ended there. I copied the footage onto 3 separate drives, mailed one to a P.O. box I rented under a false name, stored another in a sealed container in my freezer, and buried the last behind the building beneath loose gravel. It was overkill. I knew that, but I also knew that things which aren't supposed to exist don't stay still when they're observed too closely. That evening, as I was locking up, I noticed a white envelope taped to the rear door of the hearse. No stamp, no writing. Inside was a photograph, grainy, low resolution, printed on what looked like receipt paper. It showed a version of me, clearly taken from behind, walking into the black building beyond the road that had no name. My shoulders were slouched, my posture unfamiliar, and yet I recognized myself. The timestamp on the corner was dated 2 days ahead. That night I packed a bag. I turned off my phone, withdrew cash, left no notes. I drove west, away from everything I knew, refusing every call, ignoring every sign that bore a name I recognized. But each morning, the same envelope would appear under the windshield, always blank, always containing another frame of proof. Me entering buildings I'd never seen, shaking hands with people I'd never met, driving roads I didn't remember. Time began to buckle under the weight of the impossible. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I stopped wondering why. All I wanted was to unknow. But knowledge, once received, becomes permanent. Even if you deny it, it lives in you. It alters how you look at shadows, how you hear your name, how you trust silence. I returned home 2 weeks later to find the hearse gone, the garage empty, the man at the desk replaced by a woman who swore no one named Jerry had ever worked there. My employment file had been erased. My name no longer existed in the system. My final route had never been logged, but the paper still existed. The footage still played. The photographs kept coming. And now, every time I pass a dark stretch of road with no markers, every time my name appears on a delivery I don't remember accepting, every time I see my reflection move half a second out of sync in a store window, I remember the fourth message the man in the camera mouthed just before the screen cut out for good. I couldn't hear it then, but now, without sound, I understand it perfectly. His lips said, "It's you they're delivering." I suppose there comes a point where rules stop being instructions and start becoming mirrors. Not things meant to guide you, but to show you what you've become after breaking them. And that's what this last one was. Not written, not whispered, not even implied. The fourth rule was never spoken aloud, because the people who lived long enough to learn it either forgot they existed at all or were no longer allowed to say. Maybe it was part of the process. Maybe the moment you understood it, you forfeited the right to be among the rest of us. But that morning, as I stared into the place where my garage used to be, the hearse gone without a trace, and my name already receding from the memory of systems I'd once trusted to define my reality, the fourth rule settled in my chest like a weight I had carried since the beginning without knowing it. And it was this: never look into the rearview mirror after midnight. Of course I had. I'd broken the rule before I even knew it existed. That last night, during that final delivery, the one I still can't prove happened to anyone who hasn't already disappeared, I remember glancing back. The instinct had been casual, meaningless, as natural as breathing. You're driving through a forest that doesn't belong to any map, past signs that switch languages mid-sentence, with mile markers that count down instead of up, and something inside you demands to know if you're still alone. If the shape in the passenger seat hasn't somehow moved, or opened its eyes, or ceased to be a body at all. So you look, just a glance. But in that moment, the fabric around your memory begins to peel, and what you see isn't what's there, it's what's watching. I had looked. I'd seen it. But at the time I convinced myself I hadn't. I told myself I was tired, that the reflection in the mirror wasn't off, wasn't wrong, wasn't something that blinked when I didn't. It hadn't moved its lips. It hadn't raised a finger to its mouth. It hadn't whispered, "Keep driving." I told myself all of that, until the morning I returned and found the hearse missing, until the footage appeared, until the envelopes began arriving one by one, with images of me in places I had no memory of, walking into buildings with no doors, talking to people who didn't seem to be entirely made of flesh, until my face began to flicker in mirrors, until the stranger in my reflection sometimes mouthed words a beat before I did. That morning, when I realized the hearse had vanished, I thought I'd simply been targeted, like I was part of a conspiracy, a puzzle, an elaborate test. But now I know it was something else. The hearse wasn't stolen. It was retrieved. I hadn't been driving it. I had been driven. The routes, the names, the protocols, the forms, all of it was camouflage. Not to conceal something from me, but to conceal me from something else. And I'd broken that seal the moment I turned my head and peered into the mirror after midnight. That moment had started a cascade I couldn't stop, a process of unraveling. You don't see it at first. You keep going about your life thinking you're still anchored, that your face is still yours, that your voice is still tethered to your breath. But then the signs begin. You forget the names of places you've lived, You start misremembering the endings of movies. You find notes in your own handwriting with messages you don't recall writing, advising you not to go out that night, not to answer the phone, not to trust the man in the mirror. You wake up in unfamiliar clothes. You notice scratches under your nails and dirt in your sheets. And you don't own a shovel. Your neighbors stop greeting you. Your dog won't come near you. And worst of all, you stop being afraid, because fear requires some belief that you're separate from the thing you fear. But when you start to see your own eyes in the face of the thing at the foot of your bed, when its breath smells like yours, when its voice knows the rhythm of your thoughts before they're fully formed, that's when you know you're not separate anymore. You're just the echo it left behind. The final rule was never meant to keep me safe. It was meant to keep me from remembering that I had already crossed over. Because when you see yourself from behind, and the thing staring back smiles just a little too long, just a little too wide, and speaks just a fraction too late, you don't recover from that. You don't go back to being someone who trusts reflections. You start closing the medicine cabinet before you look. You keep the lights off in bathrooms. You angle security cameras toward the walls. But it's not enough. It never was. Because the moment you break the final rule, it starts keeping track of you. Not watching, tracking. Like a delivery still en route. Like a parcel with no return address. I stopped sleeping again. I stopped answering the phone. I tore down every mirror in the house. I painted over anything that held a reflection. The windows, the oven door, the dark screen of the television. Anything that might remind it where I was, but it didn't matter. The day after I covered the last surface, a package arrived. No postage, no name. Inside, wrapped in funeral black cloth, was a single object. My rearview mirror, the one from the hearse. Removed cleanly, no damage. And etched into the glass, in something like frost or ash or bone dust, were 4 words. You've already been seen. That was when I knew. There was no exit, no final trip. Because the delivery wasn't a job. It was a cycle, a system, a loop that required only one thing to continue, a driver. And once you broke all 4 rules, you were no longer just a participant. You became part of the mechanism, a gear, a route, a reflection. You stopped transporting the dead and started becoming the vessel that carried their image forward, their memory, their echo. That's why the 4th rule wasn't written, because those who followed it never saw what came next. And those who broke it, well, they stopped existing in any way that could record what they saw. I don't know how much longer I have before the mirror returns, before it installs itself in some other vehicle, before I feel compelled to answer a call I don't remember receiving, before I wake up with keys in my hand and a destination marked in red ink on a map that doesn't show highways. But I do know this. If you're reading this, and if your route has changed recently, if your shifts no longer make sense, if your paperwork contains names you've never heard but feel eerily familiar, if your reflection pauses before it matches you, don't look back. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think is behind you, don't look into the mirror, not after midnight, not ever again. Because the 4th rule isn't about seeing something, it's about being seen. And once you are, it begins its return. Through you, with you, as you. And you will never know the moment it stops being a reflection and becomes the one driving the rest of the way.